Welcome back to African Colonization TV. So today we are going to dive deep into Central Africa, where the Emperor Bokassa, Emperor Bokassa in Central Africa, where he rules his people. He rules his people in a way that you cannot even imagine. The way he rules his people, he rules his people like an animal, and he practices cannibalism. So in this tutorial today, in this history, don't go anywhere and don't skip any part of it. This our this our historians is going to explain and they tell us a lot concerning Bokassa, because Emperor Bokassa, a man who turns from being good to become terror overnight, a man who thinks for the good of his people. Before you know, he turns to become and somebody that you cannot even be thinking to go close to. Emperor Bokassa. He rules in Central Africa with an iron hand, and he rules them without mercy and without thinking that human being need to exist. And he died because of what he did. He died on because of the atrocity he committed against his people. And the man, in fact, don't go anywhere, because this Bokassa, Emperor Bokassa, is somebody that everybody believe that he will come to make the Central Africa to become a place of a living, but at the end it makes the home to become a place of hell. So as about to watch the video, try to like, subscribe, and share the video to go around. Let everyone see things happening, and if you like our stories or like to hear comments, and comment to us and try to subscribe. Through this, it is where we get our own benefit, so that we can be telling you more about things happen in Africa and around the world. So thank you for watching.
From Nigeria's Sani Abacha to Liberia's Charles Taylor and Uganda's Idi Amin, there is no denying that Africa has had more than its fair share of ruthless dictators. Now, while the crazy antics of the likes of Mobutu and Idi Amin are generally quite well known, one man whose story is very rarely spoken of is Jean Bédel Bokassa of the Central African Republic, a man whose obsession with all things European led to one of the most embarrassing demonstrations of the kind of self-defeating mindset that has plagued many within the African elite for the best part of the last century. A former officer in the French army, Jean Bédel Bokassa seized power in 1966 after a successful military overthrow of the Central African Republic's first president, David Dacko. Ripping apart the country's first constitution, Bokassa immediately appointed himself president. 6 years later, in 1972, he declared himself president for life. And just 2 years after that, he declared himself Marshal of the Republic. You see, Jean Bédel Bokassa was a man obsessed with two things: grandiose titles and all things French. One of Bokassa's biggest idols was Napoleon Bonaparte, and just as Napoleon converted the French Revolutionary Republic to the French Empire in 1804, Bokassa decided that he was going to convert his Central African Republic into the Central African Empire. During a presidential visit in 1976, Bokassa told then French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing of his plans to celebrate the establishment of his Central African Empire with a lavish coronation ceremony. According to Bokassa, the creation of a monarchy would help elevate the Central African Republic's influence in the continent and also enhance its position on the world stage. Bokassa asked the French president for financial assistance in organizing the event, but despite being initially resistant to the idea, Giscard d'Estaing ultimately agreed to support Bokassa for a number of reasons. Firstly, he did not want to risk jeopardizing France's major role in the country's uranium and diamond mining industry. Secondly, France had a major interest in maintaining good relations with the Central African Republic, which alongside Gabon and Zaire, formed the bedrock of French policy in Central Africa. Bokassa's alleged growing relationship with the anti-France Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was also another source of anxiety for Giscard d'Estaing. And all things considered, he allegedly agreed to fund Bokassa's coronation in exchange for him cutting ties with Gaddafi and guaranteeing continued French access to the country's uranium and diamond mines. With the financial backing of the French government, Bokassa's grand coronation would take place on the 4th of December 1977, a date he chose as it marked the 173rd anniversary of Napoleon's grand coronation in 1804. Bokassa's coronation would cost an estimated $30 million, which amounted to just over 1/4 of the government's annual budget, and would ultimately go down as one of the most wasteful and embarrassing events in African history. In preparation for the event, a government committee was set up to completely transform the country's capital of Bangui. The streets were scrubbed clean, old buildings were repainted, and beggars were driven out of sight. Renowned French sculptor Olivier Brice was commissioned to design Bokassa's imperial throne, and a team of 30 French artisans were hired to build the gold-plated bronze throne worth an estimated $2.5 million. 8 white horses were imported from Belgium to pull Bokassa's royal carriage, which was sourced from the south of France, and over a dozen more horses were imported from the French city of Normandy to carry the royal horsemen that accompanied his carriage. The very same 200-year-old French company that had embroidered Napoleon's uniforms was commissioned to create Bokassa's coronation attire, in association with Italian-French designer Pierre Cardin. 13 different outfits were ordered, costing a total of $145,000. Bokassa's coronation gown alone reportedly cost over $72,000, and his imperial crown was produced by a French jeweler which was founded under the reign of Napoleon. Along with his imperial scepter and sword and other bits and pieces, Bokassa reportedly spent around $5 million just on jewelry. To ensure that his guests were driven around the city of Bangui in style and comfort, 60 brand new Mercedes-Benz vehicles were ordered from Germany. But as the Central African Republic is a landlocked country, the cars had to be first shipped to neighboring Cameroon before being flown over the Central African forest to the country's capital of Bangui at a cost of $5,000 per car. Bokassa wanted the whole world to witness his coronation, and his first invitees were fellow emperors Hirohito of Japan and Iran's Shah Reza Pahlavi. But unfortunately for him, both emperors declined to attend, as did the many other reigning monarchs on the official guest list. Not a single president attended the event, and all other African leaders, with the exception of the Prime Minister of Mauritius, refused to attend the event. Reflecting on the rather disappointing turnout, Bokassa would later be quoted as saying that the other African leaders were simply jealous of him because he had an empire and they didn't. Even the French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, to the surprise of many, also refused to attend. Of the 2,500 international dignitaries that were invited, only 600 accepted the invitation. On the day of the event, the procession began with 8 of Bokassa's 29 children leading the parade. They were then followed by Jean Bédel Bokassa II, the heir to the throne, who was dressed in a white admiral's uniform. Catherine d'Engwande, the favorite among Bokassa's 9 wives, then walked up to the throne to be crowned Empress of Central Africa, just before Bokassa himself was invited to walk across the 80-meter red carpet for his official coronation. Despite the tropical heat, Bokassa was dressed in a floor-length velvet gown decorated with 785,000 tiny pearls and 1.2 million crystal beads. Across his brow, he wore a golden laurel just like his hero Napoleon. When it was time for the official coronation, Bokassa removed his golden laurel and placed the emperor's crown on his own head, exactly as his hero Napoleon had done at his coronation back in 1804. With the crown on his head, he was then presented with a gold-plated sword along with a huge diamond scepter, and at exactly 10:43 a.m. on December the 4th, 1977, Jean Bédel Bokassa was officially proclaimed Emperor of Central Africa by the will of the Central African people united within the National Political Party, the Movement for the Social Evolution of Black Africa. By the end of this shameful coronation, Bokassa had spent the equivalent of 1/4 of the empire's annual budget just on his coronation. With the ceremony, Bokassa had wanted to make a name for himself, and in this respect, the coronation was a huge success. His moment of glory was widely reported, although not necessarily in the way he would have liked. Images of his coronation were splattered across newspapers and TV sets around the world, to the eternal embarrassment of his countrymen and his continent. But while it's very easy to dismiss the actions of Jean Bédel Bokassa as yet another case of an African dictator with more power than sense, his story is actually a very sad case study on the kind of defeated mindset that has plagued many of Africa's post-colonial leaders. You see, long before his rise to power, Bokassa witnessed firsthand the brutal impact of French empire building. His father, Minogdon Bokassa, was killed for staging a village rebellion against the French colonial authorities, and at the tender age of 6, Jean Bédel Bokassa witnessed his own father's death at the hands of the French colonial authorities. His devastated mother was reported to have committed suicide just 1 week later, leaving behind Jean Bédel Bokassa and his 11 siblings. But rather than turn him against the French authorities, this traumatic experience may have had the opposite effect on Bokassa, as it seemed to ingrain a deep-seated inferiority complex that ultimately manifested itself in a maniacal obsession with French imperialism, which was embodied in his love for Napoleon Bonaparte. From the age of 18, Bokassa would dedicate his life to furthering French interests, as he joined the French Free Forces and fought for the French government on deployments to Indochina and Algeria. Bokassa's efforts in the French army would earn him awards, medals, as well as French nationality. Bokassa would often boast of his achievements in the French army, and on multiple occasions, he was quoted as saying that he was above all things a French soldier and a friend of France. But rather ironically, it was his so-called friend Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, the very same man that had sponsored his coronation, that would bring an end to his 13-year stint as the leader of the Central African Republic. Just 2 years after his grand coronation, Jean Bédel Bokassa was forced out of power, and former President David Dacko was reinstated in a military coup which was allegedly backed by the Giscard d'Estaing administration. Regardless of the deep-seated psychological issues that influence his behavior, it is very hard to defend the actions of Jean Bédel Bokassa. But nevertheless, his story will always serve as an illustration of why the next generation of African leaders must adopt a new and authentic mindset.
Oh yes, that is it. This Emperor Bokassa is not somebody that anybody will be praying to, in fact, to witness. His regime is somehow, very, very somehow. The way he rules his people with a rod hand, iron hand, and his in fact, what is there is that no matter whatever you do, there is a way God you will use to pay you the price. There's a way God will pay you. God use into one way or the other to pay him for the evil things which he has committed, which he committed against his people. How can somebody who turns from being good to become bad, who crown himself a king and who crown himself an emperor without anything, and before you know, turn around and become a demon to his own country, so all those things just because of power. And it is what African is witnessing today. The whole of Africa, once they get into power, they will become something else. Somebody that you see that is doing to be a good person, once he gets into power, he will turn to become a lion. That is what some of the African presidents, what they are to date, since the century to date. That is what many of them are. So all this issue of African, both their old and their past, and this Bokassa, I would say his own regime, it is now is even worse than what people they would think of. Is worse than what people pray for. So I would like to hear your comments down below. Like, subscribe, and share. And if you like to have this kind of video, then just make sure you subscribe and you comment down below for us to know what you think about and what is going on. And thank you for watching.